Hey, welcome everyone. We are going to give just a moment for people to join here before we kick off. I guess while we wait for just a moment, I will go ahead and just reiterate that today's session, we hope that it's very conversational. My colleague Sean and I, who you should see here with me, are going to treat it that way. We're going to have a conversation between ourselves, and we hope that you'll join in with some Q&A in the question area, and we will definitely get to your questions. We hope it can be a bit interactive. So if you've come looking for something very data driven that is sort of that typical boring slideshow, I hope we can sort of not meet those expectations and make it a bit more conversational instead. That's our hope. All right, I think that's probably long enough to give people a chance to get logged in. I'll go ahead and kick off what our topic is and tell you a little bit about myself, and Sean will tell you a little about himself, and then that gives people a little bit more time to miss the parts that maybe will be less vital to them. So just want to kick things off by introducing our topic today. We're speaking on how to streamline your property operations with tech. We're talking about this from the lens of Minute. That's the company that Sean and I are with. For those of you that aren't familiar with Minute, we're based in Sweden. We have offices there in Malmo, Sweden, as well as in London, England, and then remote staff in several other countries around the world, including Sean and myself. We're remote in the US. Our company was founded with the idea of making rentals work for everyone. So today we're going to be talking from the point of view mostly of a property manager. But our goal as a company is to help make renting, whether it be residential rental, long-term type of rentals, or vacation rentals, work for everyone, from the property manager, the guest or the resident, the neighbor, the community, etc. So we're going to talk a little bit about how technology can help make that possible today. So on the next slide, you'll just see a little bit about Sean and myself. So I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Nathan Smith. I'm the head of enterprise sales for the Americas here at Minute. I have been with the company for 2.5 years, and I'm based in the Ozark Mountains, so pretty much right in the center of the United States. And I have with me today Sean. Sean, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. My name's Sean Henderson. I'm also a sales manager based out of the Americas. I'm based out of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and I've been with Minute for a little over a year now.
Awesome. So to kick things off, I'll just tee up sort of what the topics are that we're going to talk about. It's a short list because, like I said, it's mostly going to be conversational. So we're really just going to cover some common problems that we've spoken in depth with property managers regarding. So Sean and I both, day in and day out, are in conversations with property managers where we're showing them Minute, and in those conversations we get to ask a lot of questions about the problems that they're facing. So we'll talk about the common ones that we both see. Then we'll talk about some solutions that we've seen them implement. Of course, as a part of that, we'll also tell you about Minute and what we could do to help you solve some of these problems. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. With that, we asked, thankfully, a few people in advance for some questions so that we have some already teed up, but we would love to see your questions as well directly from the audience. So if we see those, we're happy to jump in and answer them first. So to kick it off, let's jump into the common problems side of things. And I'm going to let Sean begin here with some quick definitions of some of the common problems that we see property managers face.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. So, as you guys know, I'm an account executive with Minute, and in this role, I talk to property managers daily. So, what we did, we identified 6 challenges that property managers typically face. The first one is maintenance and running costs. So, as a property manager, there's always going to be repairs that happen that need to happen. So, a dishwasher, HVAC, broken window, we expect that to happen every now and then. It's the unpredictable expenses that cause the pain and heartache. So that could be mold or years of cigarette damage that have went on in the apartment. Guest retention and resident turnover. So the goal is to make money and to keep tenants happy. So if you can retain guests, that can reduce turnover costs such as cleaning, repairs, advertising, onboarding a new tenant, which is also a cost. Now, for our short-term rental tenants, what the goal for that should be to create repeat guests. Now, if you can create repeat guests, they'll book directly with you next year. As you know, direct booking means more money in your pocket because you're not paying Airbnb or verbal fees. Health and safety, as you guys know, buildings have to be up to code. There's costs associated with that, whether it's fire, electrical, the actual structure of the building or apartment complex. If a building's not up to code, there will be costs and challenges associated with that. Regulatory compliance, which this one is very big in the short-term rental world. So short-term property managers, they know there's many laws around noise, zones, neighborhoods, occupancy, and these laws are changing daily. Um, so it's very important to be aware of these laws and make sure you're up to compliance. Also, LTRs or long-term rentals, they're facing similar issues with noise. We'll kind of talk about this later on, but a lot of these cities have quiet hours. So during this time, if your tenants aren't quiet, and it's usually nighttime hours, if they're not quiet, you actually have the right to possibly evict them or kind of issue fines or whatever around that. So we'll talk about that here later on about compliance as well. And operational efficiency, as you guys as property managers know, there's many softwares and different technologies out there that you can implement to make your life easier. Um, it's essential to find tools to help you manage this. You don't want to waste money on these tools, and you want these tools to actually provide some value for you. So, a streamline. So, what I like to say is, it's always good to find a streamlined process with these tools, whether it's for collecting rent payments, issuing late fees, managing leases, or even communication. Gone are the days of just putting a letter in a mailbox or putting a letter under doors. There's more effective ways to communicate now. And dealing with problem renters is a big one. Noise complaints, damage to the property, failure to pay on time. This can all create difficult situations. One thing that you probably want to avoid is evictions because they're time consuming and costly, and evictions are legally complicated. So I think, Nathan, you want to kind of chime in on anything you see with
Yeah, I
challenges the
mean,
property managers face?
I'm working day in and day out more often with our residential customers. So for me, I think the one that stands out the most would be dealing with problem renters. And then it goes pretty well hand in hand with retention and turnover. So I would say the thing I hear most often from property managers when they're coming into Minute with a specific problem is that they're dealing with an issue of either cigarette smoke or noise. Typically, those are definitely the top two, I would say. And oftentimes they have a neighbor coming complaining, saying, "Oh, my neighbor is smoking," or they're being noisy constantly. And it's really difficult to prove either of those things if you're not catching someone in the moment, in the act, so to speak, of smoking or being noisy. So if I'm just having to take the neighbor's word for it with no data whatsoever, it can become really tricky to prove those things and to determine whether that neighbor is overreacting or whether those complaints are warranted. And then that's where it gets hand in hand with retention and turnover, and really in the worst possible way, because what I hear very, very often is, as a property manager, I'm losing my best residents because they're complaining or not able to really stop the poor behavior of the neighbor. And so eventually they leave because they're sick of dealing with the cigarette smoke smell or the constant noise. And then I'm left with the resident that I would have preferred not to be left with. And over time, obviously, that just makes your managerial burden that much bigger. Sean, I know you work with a pretty good mix of vacation rentals and residential, more long-term rentals. Maybe your experience is a little different, or there's one that stands out.
Yeah, one that stands out for me is regulatory compliance. As Nathan mentioned, I work with a lot of short-term rental property managers. So with regulatory compliance, there is a lot of, I guess, laws based around short-term rentals, from zones. I mentioned neighborhoods, laws around noise. In certain cities that are very heavily, there are many short-term rental properties in various cities throughout the United States. So in these cities, they put down laws which kind of make it difficult for short-term rental property managers. If you do not follow these laws, you could possibly lose your short-term rental license in that city. There are big fines if you don't follow these laws. So that's one thing that I always hear from short-term rental property managers. If there's a party at your, I talked to one where there was a big party and he actually had to lose his license for 6 months because the party got out of control. So there's laws around noise, there's laws around zones, and you just have to make sure you're compliant with these laws, or you could lose your license or face harsh penalties.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that leads us into, sort of the challenges. How do we solve these? Like we've talked about the ones that are a bit more common, or the ones that you and I tend to hear more often. So what are people doing to solve them? Some of these are things that we've heard from property managers and maybe don't have firsthand experience with, but we're happy to share what we've heard from them, because as we're speaking with them about their needs to combat cigarette smoke or noise, we also end up hearing about other issues that maybe Minute doesn't solve, and we get to ask how they are solving those. So to sort of go over the ones that we hear most often, you can see the list here. Maintenance management software is a big one. These are the types of tools that my customers tend to use to track their ongoing regular maintenance, set schedules for that sort of thing. If there is a task that's maybe not a regularly scheduled one, but something that's cropped up due to something that Sean mentioned earlier, like a broken window or a broken HVAC unit or something, this is also where they'll typically go in and schedule those types of work tickets to be done by the maintenance team. So I hear that one a lot as something that's a pretty important piece of the puzzle here for the tech stack is management or maintenance management software. The next that I hear about, and actually our colleagues in the EU hear about even more often, is energy and utility management softwares. So we know that those costs are rising for everyone around the globe. I know in Europe, it seems to be an even bigger issue than it is for us here in the US. So we hear about our colleagues there often talking to their customers about energy and utility management systems. These are systems that obviously you would use to track how much you're spending on things like electricity, gas, et cetera. Definitely a big cost, especially if you're involved with paying those utilities. If you have a short-term rental, vacation rental, obviously that's on you, and it can be super critical to make sure you have a handle on how much the energy is costing you, what those utility bills are. At Minute, we do have some features that could actually help you out there. We will touch on that here in just a bit. Then the next one on the list here we see is automated leasing and booking platforms. This one is probably the most common that I hear in terms of what people are already using to help make their business run a bit more efficiently. So that would be something like a property management system. So for our vacation rental customers, we hear a lot about systems like Guesty or Hostfully, those types of property management systems. For my residential rental customers, I hear about Yardi and RealPage often. Those are probably the two most common. And what people are doing with these are automating, some of the lease information. If you get a new resident, you put their information in, it automates a bunch of the process for you, those recurring tasks that you would have to do for each resident. For your vacation rentals, it's going to take your bookings from places like Airbnb and Vrbo and maybe direct bookings like Sean mentioned, put them all in one place, and then allow you the opportunity to keep everything in one centralized location related to those guests that are staying in your property. And then last, we come to smart home devices. So this is where something like Minute would come in. So obviously, we know a lot about this one. We can definitely talk about the ways that it helps people automate some of the more tedious tasks involved with managing their properties. But people use smart home devices like Minute and some others like smart thermostats and things of that nature to make sure that they're not having to be quite as proactive themselves with checking in on every single rental unit at all times. And so we do this by sending you automated notifications about whatever it is you've set up within the system. So let's say noise is the most important thing to you, then obviously we would help you set up a monitoring system that puts a threshold that makes sense for you in decibels. And then if someone goes over that, we can send you an automated message to let you know that the noise is too high. Sean's going to dig more into that here in just a second, so I won't go too far into that. But actually on the next slide, you'll see a little bit more about what it is that we do specifically to help with some of these problems. Sean, I'll let you sort of talk through this particular list.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely talk about how Minute can help you guys out. So the first thing is real-time monitoring for maintenance. And I always like to say real-time monitoring is always better than learning about the issue after the fact. 9 times out of 10, when you learn about the issue after the fact, it's too late and it'll also be more costly. So first thing that we monitor in real time would be noise. So you can learn about with Minute, it'll alert you if the noise gets too loud in your property, and it will send out noise alerts to you and your guests. With smoking, we also monitor that in real time. So we would alert you when the smoking starts and when the smoking stops. Um, also, to kind of go that goes along with noises parties as well. So with Minute, we have an occupancy detector that'll notify you if the property gets too crowded. That's more bigger in the short-term rental market. Um, and then also with noise, with the party noise, if the noise gets too loud, you can assume that a party's going on, and it'll send out alerts to the guests that are at the property. Nathan did mention utilities and expenses, which is big in the EU. Not sure how big it is over in the United States, but Minute will alert you about temperature changes or humidity changes. So if you are paying the expenses for your tenants, or in a hotel kind of setting where the guests have the ability to turn up the heat or turn up the air condition, let's say they leave the room for hours and leave the air conditioner or the heat up, you would be alerted because the room would get too hot or too cold. And with Minute, you can set temperature controls to receive alerts if it gets too hot or too cold in the property. And last, but not least, kind of simple, Minute also does have a window break detection feature. So if a window was to break in the property, Minute would alert you. Now, as you know, this could cause more damage. Let's say a window break and rain entered the property. Now you have mold issues or any other kind of issues from the rain that can be prevented with Minute. Second thing is noise and cigarette smoke monitor, improve neighbors' relations and retentions. So I kind of highlighted noise. So when it reaches a certain decibel level, Minute will send out alerts to the property managers and the guests. A good example of this is we all watch the Super Bowl. Let's say we're watching the Super Bowl with 5 of our friends and we get kind of rowdy. Um, More than likely, the people that are watching the game, they're not going to realize how loud they're being. Um, so what Minute would do is Minute would send a friendly reminder. Now you can customize this text that goes to the guest to say whatever you like, but it could be something simple as, "Hey, you exceeded the decibel level set for the apartment complex," or whatever you want in there. So that reminder can go out to the guest to quiet down, and 9 times out of 10, um, they'll quiet down when they receive the first alert. Um, you see here, health and safety monitoring. So this is big. So most apartment complexes in the United States are smoke free. And one big thing is your tenants that don't smoke, they hate smoking. And if they don't hate it, they could possibly be very sensitive to smoking. So what Minute does, Minute can learn the air quality of the room. And if it senses there are smoke particles in the air, it'll alert the property managers that smoking has occurred in the room. I mentioned earlier that Minute will also pick up on temperature and humidity. And based off the temperature and humidity of that room, Minute will alert you if there's a smoke risk. So as you guys know, there are many health implications with mold. Um, so that's something that Minute can help prevent you. And Minute will also alert you if any alarms went off in the property. So if there's carbon monoxide or a smoke detector went off in one of your properties or apartment complexes that you have Minute in, it'll alert you that there's an alarm going off. and local regulation compliance. So for my short-term rental people that are on this call, if you are in New Orleans, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Springs, California is another place. You know, one thing they law that they implemented was that you have to have a noise monitoring device in your property. So Minute will help you be compliant with that ordinance that went out in those three cities. Also, many other cities have regulations where it says you cannot be over 80, 85 decibels, or whatever the law is. So, Minute will provide you with detailed reports that will show that your guest or your tenant was not over 80 or 85 decibels. Now, for our long term rental property managers that are on the call, I guess your compliances are a little different, but based around noise, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in Pennsylvania, so Philly has I guess, nighttime hours where you cannot be over a certain decibel level. Their nighttime hours are 9 p.m. to 8 a.m., or sorry, quiet time hours, I should say. Pittsburgh is 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Now, what Minute can help you do to become compliant with these quiet time hours is alert you how loud your tenant is during these times. So, one thing, if a tenant is continuously loud during these times, you have the right to possibly evict them. Of course, there's going to be challenges around proving that these tenants were actually loud during this time or continuously loud during this time. So, Minute would be there to provide evidence that you could prove that these tenants were loud. I think Nathan, did you have something you want to add to this?
Yeah, well, I think actually, if we look at the next slide, it's a good representation of all of the features, or at least a large majority of them that we offer. So if you want to get a different view of the types of things that you could monitor if you're using Minute, you can see here, I'll read from left to right. We've got noise monitoring, cigarette detection, tamper detection. So this is obviously letting you know if the resident or guest has removed the device from its mounting bracket or is trying to tamper with it in some way. Occupancy monitoring, which, like Sean mentioned, is basically detecting a crowd if one is gathered in your unit. Temperature and humidity, Sean also mentioned those, as well as right below it, the mold risk. Those go very well hand in hand. There's an outdoor mode, so if you're actually needing to monitor outdoors instead of indoors, these sensors are capable of that as well. There's a motion detection feature. I mentioned mold a moment ago. And then Sean mentioned alarm recognition. If there's a fire alarm or some other alarm sounding within the unit, it's likely not connected to Wi-Fi. It's not giving you any like sort of smart alerts. We can basically take that alarm and turn it into a smart alert by letting you know that there's some other sort of alarm sounding within your unit. So if any of these things are of interest to you, probably worth taking the time to book in a one-on-one demo, and we can run you through specifically how that particular feature works. As Sean mentioned, the big thing here is typically data, having proof to be able to go back to either a long-term resident or a guest that recently stayed in your vacation rental and prove that they've done something against your terms. So whether they were too loud, you'll have the noise data there, easily exportable. We've also got reporting that can allow you to download a report that showcases a noise event. Same thing for cigarette smoke detection. You're going to have a log of date, time, unit number. Very easy to pull that log and showcase exactly when someone was smoking as proof. So if you do have to take something to eviction, or you're charging someone a fee after a short-term stay because of smoking, you've got that proof there handy. Makes your life much, much easier, whether you're talking to the courts or you're talking to someone like Airbnb to enforce a deposit. With that, we're going to switch over to question and answer time. As I mentioned, we already have some questions ready to go. So I'll try to take a mix of those plus any that might be added from you. So if you have one, feel free to drop it in here. I'll kick things off, since we were talking about data a moment ago, with a question that we had asked ahead of time. That's, how long is data stored in case you need to use it down the line to build a case? Great question, and one that our property managers ask quite a bit on the calls that I have. And the answer to that is, if you've got a Minute account, then you've got the data from the time that Minute account was created. So if you've been a customer for 2 years and you have an issue with a resident, that began 2 years ago, you're able to look back at that data and pull it whenever needed. So if you've got an active account, that data is being retained. It's not being deleted after just a few days or anything like that. So it's always there for you to pull up in a report or export. Sean, I think there was one about how people typically notify guests or residents about using Minute. You want to tackle that one?
Yep. The question is, do users typically notify the resident or guest that this is monitoring them? And I would say yes. It's very common that the users do notify the guest or residents. We work directly with Airbnb, so for our short-term rental people out there, there's an icon in Airbnb that you can alert anybody that books your property that you have a Minute device installed. And same thing, we provide um, resources on our website, which would be a welcome letter that you can send out to your guests or tenants that just list that you have Minute in your home. And that says something like this home is equipped with a Minute device that monitors inside the property, including noise levels, temperatures, and motion to enjoy guests have a pleasant stay. So it's not recording anything, so it's less invasive than a camera. I think we
Yeah,
had another question.
actually, I'm going to skip down to one that I saw that's somewhat related to that. That mentions the question is, have you seen any trends in resident reactions to this sort of software or technology, and how do property managers effectively communicate the benefits to residents to make sure they feel comfortable? So that's a bit more of a long-term residential rental questions, but it goes along with what you've just said, Sean. I think proactive communication is key here. Telling your resident that this type of technology is in the unit is key. So from the very beginning, to make them feel comfortable. And so what we see typically is people sending out some sort of a notification before they've installed something like this, and then making sure it's understood when someone is newly coming in. And one of the questions was sort of around like, will residents feel comfortable? And I think what you'll find is actually those who plan to come in and likely be noisy or smoke inside the rental are the ones that will be potentially shy from renting if you have something like this in place, whereas those that would end up being ideal residents are going to love that you have something like this in place, making sure that if you have a smoke-free property, that it actually remains smoke-free. So proactive communication, and we do, as Sean mentioned, have some literature that you can provide to your residents if you don't want to have to create something on your own.
Yep. So I don't want to go over the half-hour time, so we're getting very close to it. So just to kind of recap everything, Minute will help you streamline your property operations. As you can see, Minute will definitely help protect you from many different things. And like I said earlier, it's good to catch these events before they happen and before it's more costly. So as you can see, I want to thank you guys for your time. Down at the bottom of my slide is my email address. So if I do apologize if we didn't get to your questions, but feel free to reach out directly to me. You can ask me any questions, or if you have interest in learning more about Minute, feel free to reach out directly. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.